Hello and welcome along once again to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, founder members of the Wiltshire Sega Saturn Appreciation Society. I'm Stu Joslin, and joining me as always is Alex Greenwood. Greenie, how are you tonight, mate?
Yeah, hi, I'm good, thanks. I'm really looking forward to this episode, actually, because the topic we're talking about is one I'm especially excited about, so I'm raring to go, as you can probably see and hear.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a long-awaited episode. It's the return of the video game roundup. We're looking at 95 to 99 this time round. And before we go any further, I just want to say a big thank you to all of you who already sent in correspondence on this subject. We will keep it until the end, obviously, because we want to discuss our own choices first. But we've had a lot of correspondence in on this, so thank you very much. Do keep it coming in. And it's a great response to our last episode, which nobody would have actually heard yet as we record this, when we begged people to send in correspondence. So it's almost like they knew somehow that we were in need. So thank you to everybody who's written in, and we will get to that at the end of the show. Okay, so our sponsor this week is FreeServe Anytime. Thanks to the guys at FreeServe for that. If you enter the code ALRIGHT90s online when you're signing up to the FreeServe internet service, you'll get your first 3 months half price at £6.99. And that is available at participating branches of The Link and Littlewoods. So thanks very much to FreeServe for sponsoring us there.
Did you say $6.99? Are my ears deceiving me?
I know, yeah, it's half price at $6.99 for the first 3 months.
Hell. I'd always thought CompuServe was better, but if with that money, with that deal, then
you can't go wrong.
No.
You can't go wrong. I seem to remember you used to get sort of free CD-ROMs, and it was AOL, or did other ISPs do that when they were starting out? And it was like, put this CD in and sign up.
Yeah, you used to get loads of them, didn't you? AOL was definitely the main one. I used to collect them for some reason. I think just because they were shiny, a little bit like a magpie. I don't really know how they worked, but.
I remember collecting them as well. Before we even had a PC, I used to collect like CD-ROMs just because I thought they were cool. Like if they came free with something.
Yeah, they seem like they should be valuable as well, just because they're shiny.
Yeah.
It must be some sort of evolutionary thing in there. Yeah.
Just like the pager last time, if anybody actually signed up to AOL or any other ISP using a free CD-ROM they got out of a newspaper or anything like that, please do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So before we jump into the main body of the pod, we do have another What's the Most 90s? And I believe, Alex, you've got one to set to me this evening.
Yes, I do indeed. My question to you, Stu, is what is the most 90s car? Now, I know we've done an episode on 90s cars, but we didn't decide on what the most 90s one was, so I'm asking you that tonight.
Well, and it's a great question. I obviously thought back to the episode we did on cars our parents owned in the 90s. Somebody should really start an Instagram on that sort of theme. I reckon that'd be really good.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. I obviously thought back to some of the things I spoke about in that episode, like the Jaguar XJ220, for instance. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the Mark III Cavalier when it comes to 90s cars. Mm-hmm. But, and I'm going to bend the rules slightly here, and I hope you don't mind. I hope it's not in the ledger that I can't do that. But I want to go for a range of cars if I can, because I don't feel like I could pick one out of this bunch that I've chosen.
Okay.
So what I've gone for as my most 90s car is the Fast Ford. In a group. So you've got your XR2i Fiesta, XR3i Escort, obviously the Escort Cosworth, and the Sierra Cosworth as well, which is probably my favourite of the bunch because it was used by Spender in one of my all-time favourite 90s TV shows. Mm-hmm. I just feel like throughout the 90s, these cars were there as aspirational cars. These were the cars that really were on the bedroom walls of young people up and down the land who were interested in cars. Particularly, probably the Escort Cosworth was probably the one that the most captured the nation's imagination, I think. I believe it was one of the most stolen cars throughout the decade. I haven't got anything to back that up. I haven't looked it up, but I think I remember hearing that somewhere.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing that it was, you literally couldn't get insured on it because they were so stolen. Or that might have been the Sierra Cosworth, but one of the Cosworths, yeah. So I think you're right about that.
I might be edging back into the 80s here, but I particularly like the pepper pot alloy wheels on the Fiesta as well, if you know the one I mean.
Yeah, I love those wheels.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So the fast forwards were always a group of cars which captured my imagination throughout the decade, and yeah, I have no hesitation in nominating them in this slot. Did you have any thoughts?
Well, that's a brilliant answer, but I was all set to come here today with the Vauxhall Cavalier Mark III, which you just mentioned, as my choice. It was produced from 88 to 95, so kind of, yeah, would have been throughout the 90s. Just sort of symbolised, I thought, Middle England, middle class, middle of the road.
Yeah.
Sometimes literally in Northwest Wiltshire. But then I had a sudden thought occur to me just before we went to press, which was and kind of a little bit similar to you, and I've gone for the Subaru Impreza because I think the Subaru Impreza, which went into production in '92, it was the sort of start of a new type of car, the fast Japanese saloon. Those came along with a Lancer as well, and then various other iterations of those two cars for the following year. Sorry, but it was just, I think it represents that sort of, I often refer to the sort of lad and ladette culture of the 90s, and I think it's got a lot of that in its DNA. Obviously made really famous by rallying in the 90s. Colin McRae famously won World Championship in one. And I just think nothing like that really existed before the 90s, and was popularized by Gran Turismo, which is a game that might come up in our conversation later. So sort of really tied into that as well. So yeah, that was my choice, the Impreza. But I'm happy to go halves on Imprezas and fast forwards. I think Fantastic. They are really similar. I mean, the Escort Cosworth did race in the World Rally Championship with the Impreza. So
another iconic tobacco sponsorship as well on the Impreza, yes. which means it's a great choice for this pod.
Yeah.
An excellent choice. I think we've hit upon the right things there, and they can definitely go down in the ledger.
Yeah. Nice.
Although I don't think I can buy a Escort Cosworth or an Impreza like I did with the Coventry shirt a couple of weeks back. So let's just just leave that. Let's just leave that there. Okay, so as we mentioned at the top, we are talking video games this week, and we are talking specifically video games from 95 to 99. So we've already covered 1990 to 94 in a previous episode. If you haven't listened to that, please go back and do so, because there's some great stuff there. As is the usual form for these types of episodes, we've picked 3 games each from our pasts. Would you like to go first, mate?
Yes, I would. This was a kind of difficult. There are about 30 or 40 games I felt like I could have picked from. This was really in my sort of heyday of gaming, the late 90s. Early 90s was I was a bit too young, but this was like I hit gaming hard for this period, and I played a lot of great games. And none of the games I've gone for are particularly obscure, but they're ones that I dearly loved. And I'm going to start right at the end of the decade. This is almost a bit cheeky because it was released in September 1999. So I wouldn't have really played it that much in the 90s, but it did come up in the 90s. So it's Age of Empires 2, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, is a strategy game set in the Middle Ages, along with other strategy games of this sort. You'll start with a few villages, you build up your village, then you build up an army, and then you engage in warfare with various other players around you on the map. And I just loved it. I played it so much, and importantly, I still play it. It's probably the only game from the 90s that I will still play without any sort of irony, almost. Like I would play it because it still stands up just as well as it did in the day. I don't think it was surpassed by any other strategy game. Not that I ever really played that many strategy games. I played The Settlers on the Amiga, which is kind of a spiritual precursor to Age of Empires. It was also a medieval strategy game, but this was just so good. I think it's an example of a game where I had the demo. I think you mentioned in the last episode how much we used to play demos back in the day, and I don't know if it came with Windows or something, but I had the first level. The William Wallace campaign was on the demo, and I played that a lot. And I was really racking my brain to try and work out what this memory actually was, but I think I was in hospital for something, and when I came out, my parents had bought me this game. I distinctly remember my dad giving it to me. So there was, something happened there. I don't know why. I can't work out what happened. I guess it's just because I'm getting old, but there's some connection to being in hospital. And yes, I just played it a lot, one player. And then there was a period when me and a couple of friends from school used to play it online, and that was my first experience of online gaming. So that was probably not in the 90s at that point, but it was a 90s game. And yeah, it's a great game to play online. Did it when I went to uni. A few of us used to play on LAN in halls of residence. And like I said at the start, it's a game that I can still play now. And I kind of have to not start playing it unless I know I'm going to be quite quiet, like not going to be that busy over the next month or two, because I'll just want to play it all the time. So I've got to be kind of careful with it. And yeah, that's my first choice. Age of Empires 2, great game.
Brilliant. This is a genre of game which I wasn't really into, I have to say, although I had my best friend Matt Coe. I'll say he's a friend of the pod because he keeps getting mentioned all the time. I'm not sure if he's ever listened to it. If you do, Matt, hi. But my best friend Matt from primary school used to play Command and Conquer.
Yeah.
Which I believe is a similar sort of thing. Is that right in terms of strategy and stuff like that?
Well, I'm kind of the same as you. I don't really play many strategy games. I haven't really played anything apart from this much. But some of my friends are really into Command and Conquer. Yeah, I think that's one of the big ones of the genre.
Probably the equivalent game for me is Championship Manager 0102 in terms of hours played. But obviously we can't talk about that. I know that feeling well of a game totally absorbing everything you do, you know. And I had it probably over lockdown, in the first lockdown in 2020, when I got hold of a non-league database patch for Football Manager 2020 and managed to take Caution Town to the Champions League.
My goodness!
Yeah, that was a long time in the making.
That's incredible.
Probably 300 or 400 hours I put in on that, just while we didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah, I mean that's so much.
But now I can't get back into Football Manager because I just can't feel that I can top it. You know, I don't think I can top that. So
you couldn't top that, no. Okay, what was your first choice?
Cool. Well, I'm gonna start with some demo disc chat as well. You'll be pleased to hear.
Nice.
And I'm going to 1998, and I'm going to a game called Sega Worldwide Soccer 98. Now, as discussed in the previous episode, my dad used to be a huge gamer. I was lucky enough through my childhood to have the various points, the Mega Drive, the Saturn, the first PlayStation, the N64, all the way up to the PS2 when he retired from gaming. I've told you why he retired from gaming, haven't I?
Yeah,
I think we've covered that.
Remind us for any new listeners.
He'd mastered Tiger Woods 2006, I think, to such an extent that he was probably one of the greatest worldwide players of the game. I'm not sure. And then they brought out the 2007 version, and they changed the putting system, and he couldn't get the hang of it. And I don't think he's picked up a controller since.
I love that story. I don't know why I find that so funny.
There we go. Anyway, so this is a Sega Saturn game, and I played this first on a demo disc, and I've managed to look it up. Actually, I didn't think I'd be able to, but the demo disc in question was called Sega Flash Volume 6, and according to the Sega Retro Wiki, it was given away free with issue 27 of Sega Saturn magazine. So we must have been buying that at the time as well. And on the disc was Sega Touring Car Championship, Sega Worldwide Soccer 98, and a skiing game called Steep Slope Sliders, which is difficult to say when you've had a couple, but I can't remember Steep Slope Sliders at all. But with Sega Worldwide Soccer 98, you could play one half of an exhibition game with any team in the game, but you could only play one half. And I must have played that same half on that demo disc hundreds of times with Aston Villa, with all the other different teams. And I can't remember what led to it. I don't remember bugging him too much about it, but my dad ended up buying the proper Sega Worldwide Soccer 98 for me from Pink Planet, of course, down in Chippenham. And I remember, I've still got it. It's still in my parents' garage, the console and all the games. It was £50. I remember that. I remember that clearly. And this is like out of season. This isn't a birthday or a Christmas. He's just bought me the game. Yeah. So I don't know I can't remember whether I was being rewarded for something, but that's the only reason I can think of why they would spend so much money on me. On a non-gift giving situation, so to speak. But I think I've had £50 of use out of it because, as I say, I've still got it today, nearly 25 years later. And it's the first football game really that I got into and I played sort of full seasons on. So I picked a team, I went through the championship and all that sort of thing. And obviously FIFA would follow and things like that, and eventually Championship Manager and then Football Manager. But in terms of football games, Sega Worldwide Soccer was the first, and it'll always have a space in my heart because of that. commentary provided by Gary Bloom, who was in his Football Italia heyday at that point, with co-commentary provided by Jack Charlton, who was at that time, he wasn't the manager of Ireland anymore, but I think he was starring in the shredded wheat adverts at the time, because I've just watched some back on YouTube, and I'll put it in here, but he says something like, "I'm out of the breakfast chair and I'm into the commentary chair," or something like that at the start.
Yeah.
Hello everybody, welcome to today's game. With me for the match is Jack Charlton.
I swapped the breakfast chair for the commentator's chair today. Hopefully nothing will get lost in the translation. I hope we will have a very high scoring and very exciting match on our hands today. Even though it's only an exhibition match, both teams should see this contest as a very useful preparation for the championship campaign starting later on this year.
The pitch is already a bit waterlogged in places. Hopefully the heavy rain won't affect the playing conditions any further.
Did he resign from Ireland so he could go to shredded wheat? Is that like a new contract he got, do you think? Did they approach him when he was in the Ireland job and said...
I think shredded wheat might have offered him a 3-year deal, with with an option.
Yeah, well, fair play.
The other thing I remember about this game is that it had like a merchandise like leaflet in with it, so you could get rucksacks or coats or little tote bags or stuff with the game logo on it. And last time I looked inside the case, I had rather optimistically filled out the sheet that you tore off to send to them to say what you wanted to order.
Yeah.
I filled out all the stuff, and then I must have taken it up to my dad at some point and said, "Can you just write in your credit card details here?" But the form remains in the box, so obviously I wasn't going to be lucky twice on that game. But so
you just went upstairs and just sign here, but don't have to read it. No, just pop your name there.
Yeah, so Sega Worldwide Soccer 98 is my first choice, and the much maligned Sega Saturn console, which, as I've also mentioned before, we got before the PlayStation. It's quite a derided console, but it still has a bit of a place in my heart as well, just because of the amount of time I spent playing on the Saturn as well.
Yeah, the poor Sega Saturn. It came out just before the. I know you got it before the PlayStation, but I think was it released just before the PlayStation as well?
I think so. Yeah. I'd have to double check that, but I think so. I seem to definitely remember getting it first.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a good choice. I think the PlayStation equivalent of that might have been, well, for me at least, was Active Soccer 2, specifically the second one, which was really good. It was around the same time as FIFA has already started coming out at this point, obviously, and that was the big blue ribboned brand, and so most people went for that, but I think Actual Soccer 2 was the connoisseur's choice. It had commentary from Barry Davis and co-commentary from Trevor Brooking, and it was like really well done, like ahead of its time commentary. Played a lot of that. So
we also had, for the Saturn, we had the official Euro 96 game, which I think was just Actua Soccer 2 but rebranded and just with the Euro 96 teams, because Barry Davis is definitely the commentator on that as well. So I did think to myself during the Euros last year, maybe I should dig out and play along with Euro 96, but I never got round to that, so that's still something I've got to do. Cool. Okay, well, take us on to your number 2.
Okay, my second choice was released on the 25th of October 1996, developed by Core Design and published by Eidos, so I'm sure most people already know what I'm talking about, and it is the iconic Tomb Raider 1 specifically. As if it hasn't come across clearly already, I was definitely a PlayStation person. We had the Amiga before that, but then when it came to 3D consoles, we were very much PlayStation. I think got given it probably in 96, quite a little bit after it had come out, but yeah, and this was one of the earlier games we got on it. And I think Tomb Raider is the game that represents PlayStation, certainly of this era, maybe still does. And I think when you think of mascots, Sega had Sonic, Nintendo had Mario, and I think for PlayStation, some people may say Crash Bandicoot because he's similar to those two characters, but I think really it's Lara Croft. Lara Croft represented the new era of gaming, not just the fact that it was 3D, but also just a new way of seeing gaming. It was no longer just for kids or for nerds. It was for sort of anyone, certainly for older teenagers and younger adults, and it sort of became cool again. And Lara Croft was like the character that led that movement. She appeared on the front cover of various magazines. I think most famously she was on the cover of The Face. It's a really famous magazine cover, which you can find if you just Google search Lara Croft's front cover. But she was also on the front cover of Time, Newsweek, and Loaded. And so she was just everywhere, like way beyond just the gaming world. But a little bit of trivia, which I discovered in a bit of research for this episode, was that Lara Croft was voiced by Keeley Hawes between 2006 and 2014. So Keeley Hawes is obviously massive now. She was in The Bodyguard, and she's always on BBC and ITV dramas. But all of that sort of iconic stuff is sort of not why I've chosen it. I chose it because I just loved it, really. It was it just blew me away when I first played it. It was like I said, it was specifically the first one I'm choosing here. The second one was also 90s, and I know a lot of people say that's the better one and people's favourite, but maybe the second one is better. There's definitely more in it. It's more expansive. It's got some classic levels, like you go to Venice and you can drive vehicles and stuff. But the first one, I think, really appealed to me because it's really atmospheric. It's unlike most sort of games like this, you don't really see any other people. In fact, I think there's only a handful of other humans in the whole game. So it really creates this sense of being remote. You really are uncovering these sort of lost tombs. It's really quite scary at times as well, because you're in kind of dark caverns and there's these wolves will jump out at you. So yeah, I really like that atmosphere, that kind of almost a horror game at times. It had just amazing spectacle as well. I think the Lost Valley level is one of the great set pieces of 90s gaming. I think a lot of people will know what I'm talking about there. And I just think it was really fun to play. Great difficulty level. It was kind of tricky, but still fun. And that's why I've chosen it, really. Like a combination of being iconic for this era, but also just because I loved it. I just thought it was a great game. And everyone, remembers Tomb Raider, so it's got a great legacy.
What an excellent tribute to one of the defining games of the decade. I didn't play it a lot at the time. I watched a lot of it being played at the time. Because that was one of my dad's games. I remember him having to buy he bought like a guidebook from somewhere. I think it was actually from the American Dream comic shop in Caution. But yeah, because he got stuck at a certain level place and he couldn't figure out how to do it. Of course, this is pre free serve. So we had to find out another way. So I remember him having that. My two biggest memories of Lara for myself, first of all, is the original Tomb Raider, or is it Tomb Raider 2 with the training level at the start?
I think they all have it, or the first three at least had it, where you run around to a house. Yeah,
and then you used to be, the butler would follow her.
You'd lock him in the fridge.
You could lock him in the deep freeze, of course. I
can't remember if that was the first one or the second one, or maybe both, but we all did it. We all did it.
And the other thing is that I should say my dad, but I would read it, would buy PlayStation Plus magazine whenever it came out, which was part video games magazine and part lads mag. I wasn't really old enough to be reading it, I think, because it had models in it and things like that. But I seem to remember they published, and it must have been an April issue because it was an April Fool. But they published like this great long cheat code, and they were like, and I'm sure I remember this right, if you tap these buttons in this sequence while standing on Lara's bed in the training level to the beat of Never Ever by All Saints, then it will be naked Lara.
Yeah. There was lots of stuff about that. There was like the Nude Raider sort of myth / legend at the time. Yeah, which actually it was a myth as well. There was no. Obviously that one wasn't, but none of them were.
But no, a fantastic game. I've played them obviously all subsequently, all the reboots on PS4 as well. I've been through and enjoyed them greatly. And as I say, I would think, or I would regard it as one of the defining games of the decade. So yeah, great choice.
Yeah. I should quickly say, actually, that although I did say I believe Lara Croft was sort of a mascot, as it were, for the PlayStation, Tomb Raider actually came out on the Sega Saturn before it came out on the PlayStation.
It did. So, we had it for the Saturn, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a sort of PlayStation exclusive, but I still think despite that, she did come to represent PlayStation. I'm sure like Sony used her in lots of their sort of iconography and stuff, so... I don't know, just testament to how powerful she was and also how bad the Sega Saturn was. Okay, what is your second choice?
Okay, so I've actually got 3 different consoles as well, which is sharing a love around a bit.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'm going to the N64 now. I think I began with this in the intro of the Christmas episode, but we go back to Christmas '98, and I think I must have rented or borrowed from somebody Super Mario 64, most probably from Forward Video in town in Corsham, which is now a Parsons Bakery, fact fans. And that was the game that I wanted for Christmas that year. So I played it. I liked it. I wanted it. But my dad, playing the long game, could probably see that while I enjoyed running around and doing stuff and all this sort of thing, I wasn't actually completing any of the levels or anything like that. And I wasn't getting the playability out of it, probably because I didn't understand it. It was a bit of a highbrow platformer, despite it being Super Mario. So instead, he got me Diddy Kong Racing, and this has been a bit of a running family joke over the years because it arrived. It was secondhand. It didn't have any instructions, so he picked it up on the cheap for Christmas for me. But Diddy Kong is one of my favorite games of all time. So it was a real sliding doors moment. I've been back to it countless times over the years. First of all, with a PC emulator, which I managed to get working for quite a while, and then a couple of years ago, I bought myself an second-hand N64 and started buying back all the games again. But it's one of those games where I've had countless hours of fun playing it, but I get to a certain point and I can't progress any further. And the point of the game where I can't progress from is in the aptly named, actually, for this podcast, Greenwood Village level. And there's an element of the game where once you've been round and won all the races once, you have to do it again, but collecting silver coins at the same time, dotted around the track. There's one course in the Greenwood Village area which is so difficult to win the race and get all the coins at the same time. So that's where I've stopped.
Are you still playing it then? Quite?
Yes, I was playing it last year. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
It's all still set up and everything. Yeah, I'm still playing it, definitely. And I will go back to it again. I'm sure I'll just start again and go for it again.
Yeah.
Games were a lot harder back then, I think.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't like it wasn't like now when you had sort of maybe when you have difficulty levels and things like that, and obviously the internet to help you and loads of resources to help you with completing a game. In the case again with my dad and Tomb Raider, you get to a certain point, you can't progress. And I think you said it about one of the games that you picked in the first episode as well on this subject.
Yeah. Turkey, I think that was, just we couldn't get past a certain point, and that was it. Because again, I think we mentioned in the first episode, you couldn't save as well, could you? Most of these games, but a lot of these games, you either couldn't save, maybe more early in the decade, but when you could save, you could only save in certain places. There's none of this auto save or save anywhere you wanted.
Obviously, it had a big rival in Mario Kart. They're very similar games. They're both karting games in sort of fantastical courses. Having played them both extensively, I still prefer Diddy Kong Racing because there's a story element to it as well. So with Mario Kart, it's just a racing game, but Diddy Kong Racing is, I think, in one of the characters, I think it's Timber the Tiger. So it's his parents who live on the island that they all race around, and they've gone on holiday, and then the enemy Whizpig lands and takes control of the island, and then the children have to win all these races to sort of vanquish him. And I really enjoyed the story element of that as well. One more thing on Diddy Kong, apart from obviously a grovelling apology to my father for having to go at him all this time for it, because he definitely did the right thing. With the N64 that I bought myself last year, I got Super Mario 64. I thought, right, I'm finally going to get it and do it. And I mean, I can't make head nor tail of it now, and I'm like 20 years older. So he really did make the right decision there. Even with like YouTube guide help and stuff like that, I still can't manage it. So that probably says a lot more about me than I wanted to. But there you go. When I was about 16 or 17, I'd got hold of the soundtrack for Diddy Kong Racing, and I'd put the theme tune as the ringtone for my little Sony Ericsson pay-as-you-go mobile.
Yeah.
One night I got in, I can't remember what I was doing, but it was quite late, got in, went to bed. I hadn't put my phone on silent, but there'd been a spate in my friendship group. We'd all worked out how to sort of withhold your phone number. By putting the is it a 7 on the front of the number? I can't remember. And somebody rang my mobile at about 1:30 on the withheld number, but obviously it went off. I'll put it in here because you'll hear now the music that was blaring in my bedroom at 1:30 in the morning with my parents having to go at me, and I couldn't find the phone as well. I was scratching around for it. So this sort of tropical race game theme music was playing. So I'll put it in here now, and you can imagine the frustration in the house.
It's kind of strange or surprising that Nintendo had two big rival kart racing games. I'm guessing Mario Kart would have been around the same time. Must have been if it's on the same.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and Diddy Kong Racing was produced by Rare, who were of course behind the other big N64 game in GoldenEye.
Yeah, I think probably they are the best multiplayer games, sort of cartoony kart games. We have regular, or we used to before COVID, have regular meetups to play Mario Kart on the Nintendo Wii. And even though it moved on to the whatever came after the Wii, was it the Wii U? Whatever.
Yes, I think so.
Mario Kart 7 was one after, and we still go back to just the Wii one because Mario Kart 8 came after, and then 7 was still the best. And it sort of just shows it doesn't really matter what the graphics are like on those games. There's just something about them. If they're done right, then there's nothing better. No football game will ever beat that, I think. So yeah, good choice. So my final choice is still my favourite game of all time, and I think arguably the greatest console game of all time. Released in 1997, I'm sure lots of people listening will be auto-completing what I'm about to say, but it's Final Fantasy VII. Like I said, I think it's the best console game of all time, and it's definitely my favorite. And I think with so many of the choices I make on this podcast, and I'm sure the same with you, Stu, nostalgia plays a leading role in why I think a game or whatever it is so good. Mm-hmm. I can't separate those two things, but plenty of other people agree that this is the best or one of the best games ever made. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm surprised you're listening to this if you don't know what Final Fantasy is, but it's a Japanese role-playing game, and there's obviously at this point there'd been 7. I think it's up to like 15 or 16 now,
yeah,
along with loads of other sort of sub games and connected games to the canon. But number 7 was the first on the 3D sort of era of consoles, and it features a character called Cloud and a band of eco-terrorists that he ends up joining in order to stop a world-controlling mega corporation. So people who know me will straight away be thinking, okay, hang on, there's a reason why this connected with Alex. So it's a great story, I think. And yeah, it was the first RPG I'd ever played. It wasn't like anything I'd ever played before. And I remember being really skeptical when it was talked about. I think I've been used to playing, Destruction Derby and Die Hard, these sort of just pure fun games. And I'd heard about this game. I think it was in official PlayStation magazine. It got 10 out of 10. And so there's a lot of buzz, and I was thinking I don't really want to play it. But then my brother was saying, like, no, we should get this because it's supposed to be amazing. We did get it, and it just completely changed the way I think about games. And it just connected with me in a completely different way to all those other games, because as fun as something like Destruction Derby 2 is, and it is fun, it's you're not going to be thinking about it that much, the next day after you finish playing it. Whereas this was something else. As with all RPGs, it was really story focused. That's kind of the whole point of it. And the story was just great. It was a brilliant story. You could change your characters' names. This is something I imagine you can do in all the Final Fantasies. I've only played 7, 8, and 9. But you can change your characters' names as you come across them, including obviously the player that you play as, which is Cloud. So I changed obviously his name to Alex. Changed the female protagonist's name to the name of the girl I fancied at school. Straight away, that just creates even more of a connection with this story. And then it's a long game. I think most RPGs are long, but I sunk over 100 hours into this game over the course of a couple of years. I think I had two sessions on it, as it were, and so it kind of created this even more of a feeling of it being an epic quest. And it just changed the way I thought about gaming, really, because it was the first game I'd had an emotional connection to. There's a famous scene in it where I know people at school said it was the first time they'd ever cried at a game. Actually, I think probably it was more that people would sort of bully other people and say, "Oh, they cried at this." So I don't know if people would ever actually admit that they cried about it, but there's a famous scene in it. A lot of people will know what I'm talking about. And I just, I cared about the characters. I cared what happened, and it felt like I played it for about 10 years, But when you're that age, everything feels like it's a lot longer. But it stayed with me all this time. I still think it's the best. I don't think anything will ever overtake it. And yeah, I know there's a lot of diehard fans out there like me, so yeah, it's just the best. Final Fantasy VII, still the king. Long live the king.
Brilliant. Is this a game that you got to a certain point with and never finished, or did you finish it?
No. I finished it. I did stop for quite a long time. I think I must have got halfway through and then just moved on, which is something I think I used to do in those days a lot more. I wouldn't complete a game in one go. I'd have phases of playing games, whereas now I kind of just want to get it done so then I can move on. But yeah, no, I definitely finished it. I know a lot of my friends played it multiple times. I never got that with this game because I thought it meant so much to me and it was such a great story. Like playing it again just didn't make sense to me. It's like, I've done that. It's a bit like you with Corsham Town to the Champions League final. I think I don't want to start that again because that story happened. As far as I'm concerned, that story happened for real. So you can't go and do it again because it was something that, I don't know.
That's exactly it. And it's, it's the world that you get absorbed in, like, again, taking it back to the Football Manager thing with like the regen players who came along and got into the team. Like, I'll still remember their names like 20 years from now because I did this thing with them. It's the way that these games can take hold of you.
There was the remastered version has come out, I think last year or the year before. It was like in development hell for ages, and there was so much hype about it. And lots of people I know said like, "Oh yeah, I'm definitely going to get that." I'm not interested in that at all. I don't want to play it again in a sort of new shiny version because I don't want to sully my memories of that game, and it's just not the same. I don't really understand why people want to do that, but
I understand that completely. Never go back. This was a game that I aspired to. I remember wanting to play it, but just never quite. When I had the choice of games, and there was always another option that I picked over it. I'm not sure I really have the capacity to follow it through and all this sort of thing. So, I never did get around to it, but it really sounds like I've missed out.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I totally see where you're coming from. I was the same. That's what I thought, and even now, like I've only recently finished playing Final Fantasy 9. I mean, and I didn't get into it in anywhere near the same way. I think you've got to be a certain age and you've got to commit to it, and I have to be a certain age anyway. I know there's plenty of gamers out there of all ages who will love Final Fantasy games now, but it was the time and place, man. So much on this podcast, it's the time and place. What's your third choice?
Well, I'm moving on to my third different console. I'm going to my Game Boy Color now, and as I've said, writing the notes up for this pod has really made me realise how lucky I was with all the different consoles I was able to play with at the time that they were current, albeit as a result of my dad's interest in them. But I still managed to get that, which I'm very grateful for. But this was a console all of my own, the Game Boy Color. So I'd had like a black and white brick Game Boy that was bright yellow for quite a while, and then the Game Boy Color came out, and that became my Christmas present. So that was top of the list in some. Again, this is late 90s. It might have been 99 actually. It was definitely 98 or 99, and my dad wandered across the road to Toys R Us while he was getting his clutch replaced in Bristol one afternoon, and picked me up I still remember it. It was like a clear plastic, but it was purple Game Boy Color, and it came with Tetris DX, which is my final choice. So obviously the classic game Tetris, one of the greatest games of all time. Certainly the greatest puzzle game of all time. Yeah. But remastered for the Game Boy Color. It's regarded as one of the best Game Boy Color games, having put some research in, and it's also Alexei Pajitnov, who is the creator of Tetris, says that this is his favorite version as well. So that can't be bad. Hadn't really played Tetris before this, and it's just another game that I spent countless hours in. It had 4 different music choices, so when you were going in to play a game, you could choose the music that played in the background, and I always chose the same music because it was my favourite, and having not heard it for years, popped onto YouTube just before we recorded to have a listen, and I'll put it in here, and you can hear the music that I used to play every time. it had a mode on it as well called 40 lines, which wasn't on the original. You had to clear 40 lines in the quickest time possible. So I used to spend a lot of time playing that mode, just to try and beat my best time. And it's just, I don't know where the Game Boy Color is now. I'm hoping it's still hanging around in my parents' house somewhere. Did have a look at buying another one the other week, but I've still got a Game Boy Advance hanging around, which plays all of the old Game Boy games. So really, I can't justify it,
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved the Game Boy Color. I loved Tetris DX, and that's why it's my final choice. It came with a nice black cartridge as well, where all of the Game Boy cartridges were normally grey. This was a really sleek black cartridge, yeah. So
very nice. Yeah, Tetris is the best. That's the greatest puzzle game, surely, isn't it? I think because we used to have it on the Amiga. I think it still stands as the only computer game my mum's ever played, or certainly ever shown any interest in playing. I seem to remember her and my dad having to lock me and my brother out of the living room so they could play it for a bit. Because, we wouldn't let them. But yeah, good choice.
Fantastic.
Nice to have like a good sort of old-fashioned game in there as well, even though we're talking about the late 90s. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, obviously, it has its roots in the late 80s, but I'll count it as a 90s game here because this version obviously was released in the late 90s, and there were lots of other great games I played on the Game Boy Color as well. So really, it's a tribute to the console as a whole because it was my own, it was my own thing as well, which I really appreciated. So had no hesitation in putting it in.
Okay, so we've got a couple of wild cards, I believe, haven't we? My wild card is a game that was released on October 24th, 1997, so the same year as Final Fantasy VII, and it's G-Police, which was also on the PlayStation. I'm not sure if it was on any other consoles, but I think it was mainly just PlayStation. Published by Psygnosis, which I think is maybe the most 90s games developer. Not to ruin a future what's the most 90s, but
PSYGNOSIS, is that how it's spelled?
Exactly,
something like that. Yeah.
Had a great sort of logo. It was like an owl, an angry looking owl.
Yes,
I think
indeed.
they actually maybe developed Shadow of the Beast 2, which I talked about in the first gaming episode we did. And this was a science fiction based flying shoot 'em up. It was set in the year 2097, which must reference Wipeout 2097, which was also made by Psygnosis. But it's set on a colonized moon of Jupiter. And there's these various cities scattered around the planet, sort of built in these biodomes, linked by tunnels. And the aesthetic is clearly heavily influenced by Blade Runner. It's these sort of tower blocks, and it's dark all the time. And you play as a character called Slater, who's a member of the G-Police. You complete various missions whilst also trying to investigate, I think it's the death of your sister, I think. And you're flying this sort of helicopter-based ship, and you're just shooting various weapons. And I picked it as my wildcard because I just think it was massively underrated. I loved it. I think it, like I said, it looked great. Really great game design. Really fun. Like a great learning curve and difficulty level. And it was well reviewed. I've looked it up, and Edge magazine gave it 8 out of 10. PlayStation Plus, the aforementioned PlayStation Plus, gave it 91%. But despite all that, I don't know anyone ever who ever played it. Like when I was at school, no one played it. I've never met anyone since who played it, but I just thought it was brilliant. There was a sequel I never played, but because I don't think it was supposed to be as good, but the first one was just brilliant. Did you ever play it? Do you know anyone who ever played it?
I wish I could break your duck, mate, but I'm afraid I didn't, and off the top of my head don't know anybody else who had it either. Certainly played Wipeout, as I'm sure a lot of people did. But no, this is one that passed me by, I'm afraid. So you've got a real sort of curate's egg there, I think, of a game.
I recommend people just have a quick look on YouTube, just to look at some playthroughs and just to see what I'm talking about. But actually, in fact, there's no point in doing that because you've missed your chance. You should have played it at the time.
It's a moment in time. These are all moments in time. You can't go back. So I've gone with a game that I didn't like so much. I felt like I had to redress the balance after waxing lyrical about 3 of my favourites. So me and the old man, when we went on the shopping trips when we had these consoles, we used to buy games sort of sight unseen. So if we were in a shop, we saw a game, the price was right, and we sort of liked the look of it, then we would get it. And certainly towards the end of Sega Saturn and PlayStation, you could pick up games, secondhand games, for $4.99 in some cases, which was quite handy for me because I used to get weekly pocket money of a £5. So if I wanted a new game and it was $4.99, then we were okay, and I had a penny left over. And this was one such game that I'm going to talk about now. It's called Bubsy 3D. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No, I haven't.
But it's a follow-up. It's the fourth game in the Bubsy series, believe it or not. So it's a pretty obscure game series, published by Accolade, another very 90s
definitely
games publisher. It's a 3D platformer for the PlayStation 1, and it was universally panned on its release, and it's actually regarded still in the sort of countdowns that you see on these subjects as one of the worst video games of all time on any console.
This is what happens when you go shopping and buy a game just based on the price and what it looks like.
This is it, exactly. This is it. But listen, what can you do? You pay your money, you take your choice. Having read up a bit on its sort of creation, it looks like it was a case of underfunded, not very much time, for the developers, and the studio wanted to get out as soon as possible. They had their hands tied with what they could do with it. And I've also read that the creator actually went to a game show or a games expo while they were creating Bubsy 3D, and saw a preview of Super Mario 64 and realized that they were going to be it was going to be a way inferior game.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that had any effect on its output as well. I can't remember actually playing it too much. Presumably I played it for a little bit and then realized that it wasn't so great. So I've gone back to YouTube again to watch a little bit of it, and the voice of the title character it's no wonder that if I played it, I didn't play it for very long, because the voice of Bubsy himself is extremely grating. And I would imagine it would have had a lot of gamers reaching for the options menu to switch it off at the earliest convenience.
So, you wanna be a video game star? For starters, grab all the items you see. There's plenty of them in each level. And if you get enough of them, you'll be in for some surprises.
This is a game that I would choose to represent all of those games which we took a chance on, and then they weren't so good. I remember one for the Sega Saturn called Mr. Bones, which was about a skeleton that had sort of electric eyes, I seem to recall. That again, my dad sort of fancied, like the look of, and then played it, and it wasn't so great. And we had a few of those on many different consoles over the years. But to represent that, and as one of the worst games of all time, I felt that Bubsy 3D had to get a mention.
I've got some honourable mentions here. I don't know if you have. Just a handful of games that were close to making the cut that I feel like I have to mention. I don't have much to say about them other than just want to give them a name check. I think Gran Turismo would have been my number 4 on the list, just because it was so suited me at that point in my life. Like I'm obviously into cars, I was into racing games, and that was just like revolutionary. F1 97 almost made the cut. Destruction Derby 2. Colin McRae, Rally, and Toka, like such good racing games on the PlayStation of that era.
Yeah.
And then Die Hard Trilogy, which has been mentioned a few times. Grand Theft Auto, the original Grand Theft Auto, and then Resident Evil was close as well. So iconic and great game. We had the director's cut version, but it was brilliant.
Yeah, I can think of a couple. So the aforementioned, and I can't believe that neither of us picked it actually, but we spoke about it briefly. GoldenEye. Obviously, is alongside Tomb Raider, is probably one of the games of the 90s, and I think it's probably worth an episode of its own as we go forward, maybe, because I know that we've both played it so much, and
I've never played it.
Really?
I've never played GoldenEye. No, you're thinking of something. You probably made a very safe assumption I had, but I never have, because I never had an N64, and so.
Do you know I did make an assumption, and I apologise.
I mean, it's fair enough to assume that, but no, I never did.
Okay, well maybe we won't deep dive it then.
Well, it'd be interesting. We could have an episode where the person who's played it loads does the episode with someone who's never played it. It could be like a new approach. But
well, there's an idea. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you know me well enough now to know that my favourite genre of game is football management. Yeah. That's the one thing that stayed with me for over the last sort of 2 decades, and probably my introduction to football management games was Premier Manager 98 on the PlayStation 1, which I think had a Norwich player on the box in the ASICS kit with the green stripes. Come down.
Yeah.
So bearing in mind that this was in 1998, that was a pretty out of date image to use, because that kit was
that's 9 years out of date.
1991.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember Premier Manager '98 with great fondness as well. Just spent a lot of time playing that. I always remember in transfer dealings, when you're negotiating a contract, you could always offer the players a house and car as a bonus, and I always used to do that to try and tempt them to join. There's another one I might have to get hold of again. Actually, that'd be good.
Imagine if you could choose the car. That would have been. I would have played.
Fantastic. Sierra Cosworth, Mr. Grobbelaar. Yes, please.
There's a byline for the episode. I'm just, all we're saying now, I'm just looking back and thinking, how did I have enough time to play these many games and this much? Because now I don't find the time. I wish I could. One of my New Year's resolutions actually was to play more computer games, which is ridiculous for a 36-year-old. But I don't know how we had the time to do all this back then. Time and place. Absolutely.
Halcyon days, mate. Unfortunately, now that we have to pay bills and the like, I don't think we'll see the like of again. But it's nice to be able to get together and talk about them at least, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just one quick note, referring back to the last episode, we talked about Demo 1 in the last episode, and I think we kind of almost made fools of ourselves, and that's maybe a bit harsh on ourselves there, but
we need to make an apology, do we?
Kind of. I was confused because I think we talked about Demo 1 and I said all the games that I thought were on it, and then you found like a YouTube video or something and listed the games, and I sort of didn't recognize them, but thought, I must have misremembered. But it's because Demo 1, there were lots of iterations of it. It varied through the years. So,
well, why weren't the other ones like Demo 2 or Demo 3?
I know.
How is this our fault?
But yeah, the Demo 1 that I had did have Ridge Racer Revolution, Crash Bandicoot Destruction Derby, Formula 1, Wipeout, Die Hard, and Monster Trucks, which is such an incredible. I mean, if that's not going to make you want to buy your PlayStation, then what is? But
to be fair, that's a great collection to have on a demo.
Yeah, you don't need any games. That really. I probably lived on that for a long time. When with games being 45 quid as they were, you had to take what you could get. So you just wanted to throw that in there because a lot of gamers would have heard that and thought we were.
Yeah. Well, many apologies to all you Demo 1 fans out there.
Yeah.
So, as we mentioned at the top of the episode, we've already had lots of correspondence in on this subject, and many thanks to all of you for getting involved so freely on this subject. And we'll try our best to read them all out now. So, these have all come in through our various social media platforms, which will remind you how to get in touch with us at the end of the show. Friend of the pod, George Alty, says Super EF2000 was an absolute game changer for the flight simulator, which is something that I don't think either of us have ever really had much of an experience with. I could be wrong again. I was wrong about GoldenEye.
I did play a bit of Microsoft Flight Sim back in the day.
Okay,
and Microsoft Combat Flight Sim. Oh, that was a great game. I've forgotten about that. Anyway, I've talked enough.
He says tactical comms with your formation and superb gameplay. My favourite role was SIAD with the alarm in capitals. Don't know what that means. Sorry, George.
Don't know what that means. No, sorry, George.
Take a pre-emotive shot from about 12 miles and terrain masking on the run, all before popping up for the kill. So it sounds like he had a lot of fun with that. Thanks very much for that, George.
Yeah, that's great. Didn't understand a lot of it, but it was nice to hear from you. I've got something here from friend of the pod, Mole, who's backing me up with Final Fantasy VII, which he says is the best game ever. And so it has to be on there. He says it's the best storyline, epic cutscenes, great leveling up system, and awesome weapons.
I'm moving on to the Facebook now. So all of these aforementioned people have got in touch with us through Facebook. Thanks very much for that. James Parker writes, so many to choose from, possibly still my favourite war game of all time, Metal Gear Solid deserves a big shout out. So much to talk about, the voice acting, gameplay, story, not to mention groundbreaking elements such as making the player use the game box to advance the story. Special mentions to Lilac Wars, Civ 2, Yoshi's Island, Nights into Dreams, and of course, Pokemon Red and Blue. Thanks, James.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Metal Gear Solid was a great game. I don't know quite what they meant by the game box thing there, but I remember at the end, the final boss, it could read what you were doing with the controller. It could read what you were doing, so it was impossible. So you had to take the controller out and put it in the second port, so it couldn't read what you were doing, and that was how it worked. Like the game was designed to help you.
Right.
So, and not to help you, but you had to work that out, basically. I thought that was such a clever thing to include in the game, that you could you had to work that out and then solve it yourself by doing something physical like that, like outside of the game.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, this is from, I think I'm going to have to stop saying friend of the pod, because I'm going to leave out one person and say they're not a friend of the pod. But this is from Ian, who has contacted us before. Ian Pook, I should say, because there's another Ian later. He said Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. He said it came with a CD that had some real bangers on it. He said he took the album into school when they were asked at school to bring in their favourite song, and he played Creep by Radiohead. And the fellow 10-year-olds in his class thought he was odd, which is, I mean, not many 10-year-olds into Creep by Radiohead. But I've looked at this, the playlist on this soundtrack. It's got Primal Screen, Oasis, Saint Etienne, Radiohead, Terrorvision, Pop Will Eat Itself, and Ride, and the Boo Radley. That's on Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. What a soundtrack. It's
like the demo one of soundtracks. That's brilliant.
Yeah. He also Ian also said Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six, Delta Force. He said you could play Delta Force online, but this was back in the day when dial-up internet was what it was. So everyone was just sort of jumping around. No one could shoot anyone because everyone was just appearing and disappearing and jumping around. And he also finally mentioned Driver, which was a great game. Was sort of kind of a rival to GTA, wasn't it? They had do you remember when GTA and Driver had a bit of a rivalry, and they'd be referencing each other in each other's games?
Yes, well, I've been playing GTA 3 again recently, and there is a level called Two-Faced Tanner.
Yeah.
Tanner is obviously the driver in Driver. So
that's weird actually. So I forget that Driver was the first of the 3D ones, because GTA 3 was the first GTA that was 3D, so that must have been after. So that's quite interesting that Driver was pioneered that. I also had Tim Watson said Brian Lara Cricket, which I also loved. I used to play with Sam Perry, our mutual friend Sam Perry.
Hello, Pez.
Tim said there was a cheat that after it rained, if you did a really weak bouncer, it would roll along the floor and clean bowl the batsman under his bat every time, which he said, to be fair, ruined the game. Ian Devon said Quake, which was absolute chaos. I agree, that was a great game, pioneering first-person shooter. I also have another one here. Actually, I shouldn't really be including this. This is from Craig. He wrote this great, lovely reasoning behind his choice, and then he looked it up and realised it actually came out in 2000.
Oh, and no!
It was Perfect Dark, which was obviously the sequel to GoldenEye. And he said it was a bit more futuristic, and the first multiplayer shoot 'em up that he played where you could play with bots. So if that's the first game you could do that, that's quite I'm surprised you could do. So with GoldenEye, you had to play that with friends. Then you couldn't play that one player. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I don't think in the in the outside the sort of story mode, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because of course it was a story. It wasn't just multiplayer. Yeah. But yeah, he said it had some cool modes on it, like capture the fort, hold the briefcase, and yeah, he just loved it. So we're going to let you. Well, Stu might edit that out. Sorry, Craig, but I just felt too bad not to read that out.
Well, if we've left it in, it will be because the running time needs beefing up. We'll put it that way. Ben Woodhouse writes, a time of some true classics, some of which are still going strong-ish. It's a hard choice, maybe split over console and PC lines, and then he's categorized them for us. So PlayStation, Tomb Raiders 1 to 3, Final Fantasy 7 and 8. PC, Age of Empire, Fallout 1 and 2, and Grim Fandango. Sounds like you guys are quite similar in your choices here. N64, GoldenEye, and Mario Kart, although I never actually owned the N64. I still played it whenever at a friend's house. But the best of the best, he says, is Command & Conquer. Playing that on a LAN in a university cluster was great, and a first real foray into real multiplayer. The joy of annoying people over what would become the internet. Hearing a nuke launch and snigger as someone was being attacked, as long as it wasn't you. And then he says, an honourable mention to Resident Evil and Silent Hill for showing games could be genuinely scary. The latter I still recall getting from Choices on a weekend rental. That must have been a video game rental shop. I'm not too sure. And blitzing with my brother hunched by the screen in the dark. So thanks very much for that, Ben.
I think Silent Hill there was another demo that we had. The beginning of Silent Hill is such brilliant game design. I think it's so well done for what is a very blocky, old graphics. It's brilliant.
Lucy Thorpe writes, Not sure if my choices are all the right time period, but I only really played video games from about 98 to 2002, so hopefully they are. I'm sure we'll be all right. I'm sure we can cut you some slack. Yeah. Most of my favorites were on Nintendo 64. She says Super Mario 64 because it's the only game I ever actually finished. Lucy, can you get in touch and talk me through one of the levels on Cool Mountain, which is the one I'm stuck on at the moment? If you could message into the pod and let me know how you managed it, that'd be fantastic. She says Mario Kart because I love the different track choices and competing with my sister, and Muppets Racing for the same reason. I'm a fan of the Muppets, but I've not heard of Muppets Racing, so I might have to look into that. Banjo-Kazooie, I love the fairy tale world and collecting puzzle pieces. Also a game called Glover, which I found so difficult, I also kind of hated it. It was a game where you played as a bodiless hand or glove, and you had to navigate a ball through different zones and levels. Incredibly frustrating to try to keep the ball with you whilst moving it around. You would usually have to throw it up and then follow it. For example, when going upstairs or to a higher level. It also had a very catchy or annoying jingle. Well, we'll put that in here and we'll be the judge of that. She also says, just to finish off, I also had a Dreamcast. I never had a Dreamcast. Did you?
No.
That's one I've never, ever played. But she says, on that, I absolutely loved Shenmue. I didn't really bother with the fighting or even progressing the game. I just liked the fact that you could do normal stuff like go to work, earn money, and to go to the shops to buy cat food to feed a hungry kitten. I also remember a fun penguin racing game on Dreamcast, but not sure what it was called. So thank you very much for that, Lucy. Alistair Bucknell gets in touch to nominate Oddworld Abe's Odyssey.
Yeah, good game.
And finally, for the Facebook comments, brother of the pod, Adam Greenwood, writes in. He begins by giving some more background about you guys playing Final Fantasy VII. So as we've already discussed that, I think I'll leave that for now. If anybody wants to catch up with Adam's thoughts on that, then please head over to the Facebook group where you can see the comment. He says he ploughed hours and hours into Worms Director's Cut in the final days of the Amiga. The Die Hard trilogy blew his mind when he first played it, specifically the second game or film. He says, I had a sneak play of it when my dad and I first brought the PlayStation home, and it was torturous having to wait until Alex got it for his birthday to play it again. Do you remember this?
I remember receiving it, yeah. I cried when I got given the PlayStation, but it wasn't it was a weird emotion. I'm not going to go into it now. But I definitely remember getting it, yeah. I remember going to school and saying I got given a PlayStation for my birthday. I mean, it was changed my life. Another sliding doors moment. Yeah.
That is brilliant. Well, we wouldn't be here talking tonight without it, would we? I guess.
No,
so
I wouldn't be a nerd if it wasn't for that.
He goes on to say, I thought Tekken 2 and 3 were great, although I preferred the art style of Street Fighter 2. The controls for Tekken made a lot more sense. I don't really remember playing many games from the PS1 era with friends, but I definitely remember taking it in turns to play Destruction Derby 2, watching over each other's shoulders, and all agreeing that the music was extremely cool. I don't think I ever finished Resident Evil, but it was the first time I'd played a game that was scary, and I remember being really wowed that it had an actual video as the game intro. So there we go. Thanks for that, Adam. Do you have any more over there, Al?
Yeah, we're going to finish off with the Instagram correspondence, which is really nice to actually get some stuff on our new Instagram account. This actually came in while we were recording from Ash Mitchell. He said Die Hard trilogy. The light gun, because obviously with the second part of the trilogy, you could use a light gun. It was that sort of like Time Crisis style. The light gun made me feel like I had an arcade in my house. He said GoldenEye, still the most fun I've ever had on a multiplayer game. Another shout out for Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3. The puzzles felt so challenging at the time, and who didn't love locking the butler in the fridge? There you go.
Yeah, there we go.
And then finally, I'm sort of surprised this hasn't been mentioned before, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It was much easier than skating in real life, and the soundtrack is perfect. And I think the soundtrack to the second one is so iconic. You get it gets referenced a lot, I think, in outside of gaming circles. Like it's where a lot of us heard like a lot of pop punk and metal and stuff.
Well, I don't know. I think the soundtrack to Donkey Kong Country might have something to say about that.
Hannah Kelly, friend of the pod, Hannah Kelly said, I've had to call Hannah up on this. I don't think she listened to our first gaming episode because she said I played a lot of Where in the World is Carmen San Diego, which of course was one of your choices.
Of course, it was. Yes.
First half of the decade. But it's nice to see someone else playing that. She's also said X-Files, which I don't remember there being a game. I never played it.
No,
not
me neither.
There was, but Tim Parker has said GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie. I remember the name, but I don't remember the game. Legend of Zelda, Ocarina, I think that's. Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
Lilac Wars.
Lilac Wars.
Lilac Wars. What's
Wow,
that?
you really didn't play any N64, did you?
It was a rival. I was firmly in the PlayStation camp.
Lilac Wars was a sort of space shooter type thing. I think the title character was called Fox McCloud, and he was actually a fox, and he was like a sort of star pilot type thing.
Oh,
you know?
okay. So like that F-Zero X, wasn't that?
Similar, yeah. I think I don't know if it was the same character. I really couldn't be sure. But yeah, that was Lilac Wars anyway.
Yeah, okay. The Pop Vulture says Grim Fandango, Donkey Kong 3, and Tomb Raider 2. So there's another shout out for Grim Fandango, which I did have and was really good. Although that's another game I couldn't get past a certain point and gave up on. BLC Mixtapes said 007 was the best. I couldn't get enough of it. I assume that's GoldenEye. And I think that's it for all our correspondence. I have a horrible feeling we've missed one or two or something, and I'm going to feel really guilty. But if you haven't had your message read out, please just get back in contact and berate me and say, why didn't you read it out? If you haven't sent in any correspondence, you can still do that, and we'll read it out in the next episode. Just because you didn't get it in on this one, that's fine. There's no problem with us reading out in future episodes. You can find us and reach us on Twitter at allright90s. You can email us on allright90s@gmail.com, and we're on facebook.com/allright90s. That's all letters, no numbers. I've made it slightly confusing by setting up our new Instagram account as allright.90s.podcast. Obviously, just search for us if you don't remember that, and you'll find us.
We're nothing if not difficult to find, are we?
No. So yeah, I really enjoyed that, and thank you so much for all of that correspondence. It was so nice to have such a barrage like that, and I really enjoyed reading it and seeing what everyone thought, and especially the people who agreed with me. They were my favourites.
Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, and please do keep it coming in. Okay, so then we've reached the end of our video game odyssey. I don't know about you, Al, but I really enjoyed that one. That was a really great look back at some of the games that we used to love back in the 90s, and a great way to finish off the decade in terms of gaming.
Yeah, I loved it. I could have just done a whole episode on any one of my choices. So
I think despite the fact we've already covered the whole decade, I think there's still plenty we can discuss. So don't worry out there. I think video games will be coming back to the pod sooner rather than later. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about another aspect of 90s culture, as always. But until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.